Thanks, Charlie. So I was working in a 7 to 12 setting, and we actually started with an article. So I pulled a news article that I was wanting them to read, and it was all about distraction and where our mind's going with distraction. But one of the things I wanted them to do was just read a portion of the article and put the lens on as the teacher of their students, and ask themselves if there were words that maybe the students wouldn't understand, or that we have to do some further investigation on, whether it be just the meaning of the words, or if we had to dig deeper and actually look at the words specifically. And so one of the words that we came up with was compelling. And so we talked about what makes up that word compelling. And so we determined that it was built from the base compel. And so we did a little bit more research on words that, using that base we could make, and it actually ended up being compelling and compelled. There weren't a lot, but as we dug in deeper, we were on edymonline.com, and we dug in deeper, and all the teachers were kind of researching it. We realized that it was made up, that word compel was made up with the root pel, so P-E-L, which means to drive forward or have force or thrust forward. And so then we started brainstorming some of the words that would actually have that root in it. So propel, repel, and it was really interesting where the conversation went. So digging more on that Edymonline and having some further investigation and curiosity around this word compelling, it actually took us to a different spot and a different place. And to learn that root, meaning thrust or to move forward, how many words when we started to build the list that maybe weren't spelt with P-E-L, but they were still in that morphological family because they all were related meaning wise. And it was really interesting. So for about a 15-20 minute dive, the grade 7 to 12 teachers took off with this. And from a simple reading of an article to a dive in of a word that maybe our students might not understand the meaning of, once we started to rip apart that word and actually dive in a little bit closer, we just found a whole just different meaning to the word and where it could go with other words. So it was a very interesting task. And so that's kind of where we went with that morphological playground that day.
Thanks, Lana. We're going to do something similar next month when we get together. Also knowing that it'll be December. So we understand if you cannot attend in person because your brain cells will have left for holidays, even though you're physically still required to be at school. I want to just remind you, and this slide deck will come with the recording. So don't panic, or if there's something on it that you're like, oh, I want that, you will get that. It's okay. I just want to remind you that this work is directly connected through K-6 in the new curriculum. And in the speaker notes of this particular slide, I've pulled out the actual prefixes and suffixes that the document is requiring of us to teach in the different grades. But this idea that we're playing and exploring with words, and that we're looking at word parts and adding them and manipulating them is relevant. It is required, and it doesn't require us to use a worksheet. Lana did not have her group of teachers do the compelling worksheet. It was a conversation and a process and hey, did you notice this? Oh, wow, did you know this? And so I know that sometimes we default into that paper pencil task, but at a time when we're wanting to build oral language skills, when we are wanting to spark curiosity and engagement, sometimes it's appropriate to have conversations about them. And maybe there are some jot notes happening, but that's not what I'm focusing on as I'm moving through the work with my kiddos. So I'm briefly going to talk or remind you, of course, that when we talk about word families, if you think about a family reunion, if it's in the family, whoever sits with you on the blanket are part of your immediate family. And so when we talk about words in this way, everyone that comes to the family reunion would share the common root. So with Lana's example, the PEL, which is a bound base, would be the host of the family reunion. Compel would be on one blanket, but there might be other words that have pel that change in meaning or spelling that are going to go live on another blanket, but they're still allowed to come to the family reunion. It's like even when you get married off, you're still allowed to go to your maiden name reunion, even though your new last name is different. They're still allowed to come because the history is there. But when we're talking about word families and we're doing this initial work with our kiddos, we're really talking about who gets to sit on the picnic blanket with you. I just recently did some work with Fiona Hamilton, and that session is going to be available toot sweet on our site as an asynchronous learning opportunity. And she talks about common spelling and common meaning with her early tiny humans, because she focuses mainly on like pre-K, K1, 2. And that simplifies things, right? So if you don't want to think about it as a base element and a root, we could just talk about common spelling and common meaning to simplify it for our students. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about word families. I'm going to play for you. This is one of those cross-curricular connections. You're welcome, friends. This is a math poem. And so I'm going to play you this math poem. There's a number of ways you could obviously introduce this to your students, but today's focus is, of course, going to be to look at some certain words that he uses in the poem. If I was using this with my students, I would, of course, listen to it first for enjoyment. That's the whole point of poetry, that we hear it, right? Poetry is meant to be heard, that we hear it first to enjoy it. And then afterwards, maybe the next day or later in the day, I'm going to have them listen to it again, but I'm going to listen with my math ears this time. And I want to hear all the math connections. And then maybe the next time I listen to it, we're going to pull out some words and we're going to do some digging around words. And so we're going to listen to it again. So don't be afraid to use a text in your class multiple times for multiple reasons. And, maybe you don't play the whole poem each time. Maybe you just play a 30-second segment and you pull something out of there. So if you're a fan of puns, you can pay attention to those while Harry recites for us his poem of 59.
So 59. 59 wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, realizes all his hairs on one side of his head, takes just under a minute to work out that it's because of the way that he slept, he finds some clothes and gets dressed. He can't help but look in the mirror and be subtly impressed how he looks rough around the edges and yet casually messed, and as he glances out the window, sees a sight that he is blessed with of 60 from across the street. Now 60 was beautiful, perfectly trimmed cuticles, dressed in something suitable and never rude or crude at all. Unimprovable, right on time as usual, more on cue than a snooker ball, but liked to play it super cool. 59 wanted to tell her that he knew her favorite flower. He thought of her every second, every minute, every hour, but he knew it wouldn't work. He'd never get the girl because although she lived across the street, they came from different worlds. Of 59 and my 60's perfectly round figure. 60 thought 59 was odd. You see, one of his favorite films was 101 Dalmatians. She preferred the sequel. He romanticized the idea they were star-crossed lovers. They could overcome the odds and evens because they had each other, while she maintained the strict rules imposed on her by her mother that separate could not be equal. And though at the time he felt stupid and dumb for trying to love a girl controlled by her stupid mum, he should have been comforted by the simple song, take 59 away from 60, and you're left with the one. And sure enough, after 2 months of moping around, 61 days later, 61 was who he found. He had lost his keys and his parents were out, so one day after school he went into a house, and as he noticed the slightly wonky numbers on the door, he wondered why he never introduced himself before. As she let him in, his jaw dropped in awe. 61 was like 60, but a little bit more. See, she had prettier eyes and an approachable smile. And like him, rough around the edges, casual style. And like him, everything was in disorganized piles. And like him, mom didn't mind a friend stayed a while because she was like him. And he liked her. He reckoned she would like him if she knew he was like her, and it was different this time. I mean, this girl was wicked, so he plucked up the courage and asked for her digit. She said, I'm 61. He grinned, said, I'm 59. Today I've had a really nice time, so tomorrow if you wanted, you could come over to mine. She said, sure. She loved talking to someone just as quirky. So she agreed to this unofficial first date. In the end, he was only ready 1 minute early, but that didn't matter because she arrived 1 minute late. And from that moment on, there was non-stop chatter. How they loved X Factor, how they had 2 factors, how that did not matter. Distinctiveness made them better. And by the end of the night, you knew that they went together. On one day, she was talking about stuck up 60. She noticed that 59 looked a bit shifty. He blushed and told her of his crush, the best thing that never happened because it led to us. And 61 was clever, see, not prone to jealousy. She looked him in the eyes and told him quite tenderly, you're 59, I'm 61, together we combine to become twice what 60 could ever be. And at this point, 59 had tears in his eyes. So glad to have this one-of-a-kind girl in his life. He told her the very definition of being prime was that only one in himself could his heart divide, and she was the one he wanted to give his heart to. She said she felt the same way as she knew the films were half true, because that wasn't real love. The love was just a sample. When it came to real love, they were a prime example. Cheers.
In case you're wondering, I spent way too much time trying to find a poem the other day while prepping this. I hope you all appreciated the math puns. I was like, he was ready 1 minute early, she was 1 minute late. Like, seriously, so cute. Okay, so I picked from this 3 simple words because honestly, you could find any text with these words in them. You don't even need to attach it to a text, but it's a really nice way to leverage read alouds and other content area readings to connect them into this work, because then it doesn't feel like more, it just feels like part of what we do. It's a routine in our classroom that we use to look at or review things that we've talked about or things that we're introducing. So I've got 3 words here. These all happen to be free base words, which means them by themselves are a word. So late, look, sight are the 3 words. One of the ways that you can ask students to work with morphological families is to pick a word and put it in the middle of a web. So if we go back to these choices here, late, look, sight, I want you to pick one of those, and on a scrap piece of paper, maybe you've got a Post-it note, maybe you've got a never-ending to-do list, you can just scribble it on the side of there. Pick one of those 3 base words, late, look, sight, and put it in the middle of your web. Then I want you to just take 30 seconds, and I want you to brainstorm around the web. What are some words that you believe are in that particular word family? Remembering, of course, that it needs to be connected by the base element, the spelling, as well as the root or the meaning. So 30 seconds to do that task. Okay, so I'm assuming you've got a couple of words in the web around your base that you have there. The next thing you're going to do is, for each of the words around the web, you're going to, what we call boxing the base. So you draw a box around the base word. So I've already given you the base, right? Late, look, sight. So you'll draw a box around those. And then you would underline the affixes. So what are the prefixes and suffixes that you've added or attached to those base words and the list? And so you then end up with a series of what we call word sums. So Lana threw in the chat box, she chose the word late and came up with a list of later, lately, lateness, latest, belated. When she writes the word sum later, she would have the base word late, L-A-T-E, plus the suffix ER, and the arrow is translated into, is rewritten as L-A-T-E-R. Now, this is where your kiddos will notice, or you will notice, hold the bus, where did the other E go? Interestingly enough. Okay, so we see something happening there between L-A-T-E plus ER. Interesting. Let's put a pin in that. And rather than jumping straight into solving the problem or explaining what students see, let them do the noticing. Let them do the wondering. Let them go, does that happen every time we add ER? Are there base words where we don't drop a letter? Let's look at the word look. Can we add ER to look? Looker, yeah. L-O-O-K plus ER is rewritten as L-O-O-K-E-R or L-O-O-K-E-R. Interesting. So sometimes it appears as though an E can go missing and sometimes it doesn't. And this creates a space of curiosity and wonder. Why does that happen? Let's see if we can figure it out together. Now, I, of course, as you would with any kind of inquirative, the word just totally slipped my mind, inductive teaching, where you're planning and planting those seeds on purpose. Like, this isn't the Wild West here, folks. You've got a plan. So you've offered up some words, perhaps, that are going to guide them to an understanding, and maybe some that disrupt what they think they know. And then maybe we're going to come up with a solution. Maybe not today. Maybe it's a mystery that just hangs out over there and intrigues them as they look for other words that have this phenomenon happening. So what do you notice? What do you wonder? Is a great structure that you can use when looking at word sums. A few people have asked for resources. I want to go back to this for a second. So when you look at the word late, I was doing some mental brainstorming, and then one of the words that I came up with in my list originally was the word relate, R-E plus L-A-T-E. And I was like, is that actually connected? Because feels like maybe it's not, right? Like late around timeliness, but related, like connected biologically. Like I couldn't see the connection. Anyways, off I go to my handy website, not my personal website, someone else's pet project, the online etymological dictionary. And interestingly enough, late and relate are not in the same word family. Relate has French origin, a different meaning associated to it than late. So relate is actually its own base, R-E-L-A-T-E. It isn't, so that if I was making a word sum and I wanted to use the word related, R-E-L-A-T-E plus E-D is rewritten as related. So it's actually a different, it cannot sit on the late blanket at the family picnic. It doesn't even get an invite to that picnic, actually. And so this is where you can unearth fun facts to share with all your family and friends. My husband does not love my language fun facts that I share with him, but he pretends to listen. So I will link, obviously you're getting this slide deck. This website, the online Etym Online Dictionary, is just, first of all, it's amazing that this person does this for fun. Like this is his fun free time project. And so this is where I can look up the word, oh geez, relate. And I see here that it's actually from the French. It's connected to refer, as opposed to the word late, which is Old English and connected to the idea of time. Oh, sorry. Yes, that's what I'm looking up. So this proves to us that late is in a different word family than relate. Even though they share some of the same spellings, we saw that there. They have to also share that meaning piece. Did I know this going into our conversation? No, I did not. Did I need to be right as I headed into this conversation? No, I did not. I just had to be excited to learn something new. So we've linked a couple websites, and then someone emailed me and said, is there a book that is a good starting book or a book to know more about morphology? And Sue Hegland's book, Beneath the Surface of Words, is, oh my gosh, gold mine. Your mind will be blown into tiny pieces. Pack sticky notes. Okay, I'm looking at time and I don't want to overwhelm anyone, but I think we're okay, Lana. We do have a mix of ages, and so we can maybe just touch on it. And then if people want to dig more into how this could connect to phonemic awareness and phonics work, I think we could do that. So one of the things that you might want to talk to your students with, and I think you could do this with any age. And the reason I say this is because there are going to be kiddos that even in grade 9 who are very well read and articulate folks, unless they are spelling bee champions, I don't think that they would know how to explain why words are spelled the way they are. And in fact, I would assume they could parrot back some of the same things that I was taught around quote unquote spelling rules about why things are done how they are. So that's why I say I think you could have this conversation with any age. So is every letter in a word pronounced? And with bigger students, I might just throw that up on the board and then say, okay, give me some examples. What are some words where you know that yes, every letter is pronounced and every letter is not pronounced? You could frame this, of course, with our tiny humans that have this language is, what phonemes or phones do you hear, sounds do you hear when you say these words? So when I say the word me, how many sounds do you hear? Me, I hear 2 sounds. And then I would get them to circle them. Okay, I hear 2 sounds. I think the n sound is coming from KN, which it is, by the way, friends, they hang out together. It's not just N by itself and K's the creepy stalker. They're like BFFs when they're making that sound together. And double E is making the E. When I look at the word me, I have 2 sounds, me. And then when I look at the word shapes, shapes, I have 4 sounds that I hear. Well, what are the 4 sounds that I'm hearing? Sh, a, p, s. So when I'm circling my grapheme phoneme correspondence, the E isn't being pronounced. It's there, it's important, it has to be there, but I'm not saying it. Lan, would you say that I'm on the right track with this? What would you like to add?
No, I think that's good. No, you're great.
So this is an activity you can have your students do. If it's not said out loud, they could put a little dot or a dotted circle around it if you want it to mark it. So this is what gives us here another layer to this activity. So you could give them a list of words and figure out when is it that we are saying the E is making a noise, or it is not, and have them sort the words. So if we do that sort, we end up with something like this. Now here we have the, and we know the E is making a sound. It's not the word sound, the letter sound we would normally associate with it. And we could fall down a whole other rabbit hole about functional words and how we as humans do different things to the phonemes inside of functional words so we can talk faster. But it makes a noise. Even if it's not the noise I think it's supposed to make, it's making a noise. But when I look over here, I've got a list of words where the E is not being pronounced. So If the E is not pronounced, what is it doing there? In fact, E is our most common letter marker. We often refer to it as silent E. How many of you have heard that before? My son refers to it as the bossy E. Not that there's anything wrong with being bossy. Thank you very much. Anyway, when we simplify things to something like that, we lose the other parts of what the E does. So technically what the E is a final single non-syllabic E. Why do we call it that? Well, it's the final part of the word. It's the final letter there. Single, because it's not part of a digraph like the squealy E's, like double E. And it's non-syllabic in that it is not creating another syllable like it does in apostrophe or cafe. There, the E is actually functioning as a grapheme and is forming a spoken syllable. That's a lot to say every time I'm talking about the E at the end of the word. So you could simply refer to it as marker E. So if we're willing to call it silent E, we could call it marker E just as simply. There are other letters that are markers. So the W that exists in the word to indicates two-ness. 2, twin, 12, 20, twilight, because it happens twice a day. The W's in all of those to connect with this understanding of two. Why is there a L in the word yolk? Because it connects to the color yellow. That's the color of the yolk inside the egg. So there are markers that live. By the way, if we go back to the word knee, K is also a marker there, but that I'm not going to get into that, how that works. But anyway, so it's a marker there. What is it that it's doing then, if it's a marker? Well, its job can be phonological, even though in itself it's not making a sound. Okay, so it can have a role in the sounds that you hear. It could make the long vowel sound, hence bossy E. It can make the soft C. It can make a soft G. It could make a voiced F. Maybe it does other things, but those are some samples of what it's doing. Okay, so it's phonological in nature, but it itself isn't a phoneme. It can also function to accelerate your recognition of morphemic structures. And what that basically means is you have to remember that the basic function of English spelling is to communicate meaning. So we need to be able to, as we read, process the meaning of the word as quickly as possible. This marker E's job sometimes is to help our brains at a glance be able to tell the difference between these homophones. Brows and brows, please and please, hearse and hears. Okay. It can also act as a suffix canceling because you don't want to end in a single S unless it's plural. So worse, you don't want your brain to stop and go, what's a word and why is there more than one of them? The E's on the end to tell your brain that's not a plural. It also clarifies connections between words such as came and come. So I could take the E off of come and then it would be spelled perhaps more phonetically. But then at a glance, I wouldn't necessarily see its connection to the word came. Lastly, because of course it does, we need to know that marker E often does more than one job at a time. It's a multitasker. I bet it's a woman, actually. So it can, in these words, indicate that we're pronouncing the f at the end. It can clarify the meaning between the nouns and the verbs. And it can also, in the last two, indicate the long vowel sound. So it's a multitasking function. What Sue talks about in her book is that although students certainly need to know that the final E signals a long vowel in some words, they also need to be aware that the final marker E has other jobs and is found in words that are not pronounced with a long vowel. In other words, there are not exceptions to the CVCE rule, because there isn't a CVCE rule. There are simply words where the final E has a function other than making the vowel long. So rather than building a rule that we then list a bazillion times where the rule doesn't fit, let's just not do that. And let's talk about what's actually happening in the word. What is that E doing there if it's not making a sound? Well, it could be doing a number of things. Would I introduce this all at one time with a group of kids? No. But I would start looking at words where the E is up to something, and I'm not sure what it's up to. And I'm going to start paying attention to those kinds of things as I read a text. I'm going to encourage my kids to keep their eyes peeled for what it is they might notice about what that marker E is doing. The last thing that's important to know about morphological families is that we need to anticipate that the pronunciation of any element can shift within the family. So that's where you might be in a space where the element, the base element, changes in pronunciation when we add the different affixes. So to go from cave to cavity, fine to finish, grade to gradual. So that's one of the reasons when we're doing word sums, you actually spell out the base word as opposed to saying the base word, because the sound, what you hear in that final product can change when you add suffixes and prefixes to the word. And adding complexity here, but it's another reason why some of the spellings, why is it spelled that way? Because we have to maintain functioning across morphemic boundaries, but that's a whole other kettle of fish that we can get into another day. So it's a lot in 45 minutes, friends, and I'm glad you're still here with me. What we would like to encourage you to do for our next meeting is simply be curious. Be curious about the words that you come across that are in your textbooks, that come up in conversation, that you see in a picture book, and maybe take a moment, pull out a word, brainstorm some other words that are in the family, build some word sums. What do you notice? What do you wonder? And see where it takes you. Have a conversation with your kiddos. Do all the letters in a word make a sound? How do we know? Can we think of some examples? If it doesn't make a sound, what does it do? Or if you're not quite ready to like jump in the deep end, take a moment and explore some of those links on slide 20. Be warned, you will lose track of time down the rabbit hole of morphology and orthography. Just that's the warning label that comes along with this work. So